Hello and welcome to the Rowover Podcast. Today our guest is Harry Brightmore. He was a Brooks Cox, currently the world champion in the men's eight. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean that's pretty much the long and short of it. Yeah, I've been sort of I was at Brooks for a good number of years. I think I started there as a student in 2013. I'd been
Mhm.
at King's School Chester before that. Um, so I did my undergrad, like many sort of you see a lot of Brooks rowers at the moment, sort of like finishing their degree and then carrying on as part of the Open Club at Brooks, or
Mhm.
like the Olympic pathway stuff when that's running. Um, did I made my sort of senior debut in the Coxed Pair in 2017. That was the last time the event will run as a world championship event.
Mhm.
And then sort of formally got into an Olympic boat class in the sort of start of this Olympiad with the GB team, coxing the GB8.
Mhm.
So yeah, been part of the GB set for the last couple of years, and this year hoping to be sort of sat on the start line at the Paris Olympics.
Yeah, and so you sort of mentioned you wanted to talk about a little bit about how you got into coxing originally, and I know this sort of comes different. I remember sort of Will saying that he started off, he did like one session on the erg and thought, nope, I'm gonna sit and sit and tell these guys what to
Yeah.
do instead. Was similar story for you?
Uh, it was at yeah, I, yes and no. I think so. Like I was quite sporty when I was young. I did lots of athletics. I played football quite a lot when I was sort of,
Hmm.
well, I started playing football. My dad basically forced me to basically pick rugby or football.
Hmm.
I chose football. Played that probably when I was, 6 or 7. Started kicking a football about. Um, by the time I got to about 12, 13, I was playing for my school in like the A team. I was playing for a club outside of school as well, so I was doing
Hmm.
quite a lot. But at that age, like people obviously grow at very different times.
Hmm.
And like, one of my main traits as a football player was that I was really quick,
Hmm.
and other kids my age were quite slow. Um, and quite often the slow kids would be put in the defense, and
Hmm.
basically I just had all of the space in the world to
Hmm.
run past people, get a look in at goal, and I was pretty good in front of goal, scored quite a lot of goals.
Hmm.
But yeah, at that age, kids start to grow. The defenders actually started to get just as athletic as me and a lot stronger than me, and they were taller
Hmm.
than me. And it started to like my sort of niche that I'd sort of found for myself was quickly falling in front of my eyes.
Hmm.
And yeah, decided to pick something else, and gave like the summer camp at school a go.
Hmm.
And the head of rowing was basically like I actually did sat on an erg, and I was like, oh, I'll sort of give this thing a go. But the head of
Hmm.
rowing, who was sort of running the camp, was like, you're pretty small. We need to get you in the cox's seat and see if you'll give that a go.
Hmm.
Um, and I never looked back really. I sort of did that. I never really sort of, obviously I'm in a position now where like lots of things have gone successfully, but through school I was sort of in and out of like the B crew, the C crew. It's not
Hmm.
like everything went my way as soon as I got in a rowing boat. Um, but I think yeah, like when we were chatting before uh doing this podcast, I think one thing that maybe doesn't get spoken about enough with coxers getting into the sport, and I guess this is going to be like my sort of my hill to die on potentially
Hmm.
that we can sort of delve into and discuss, is that I actually don't think that to be a successful cox you need to know everything about rowing.
Hmm.
And I think my route into coxing and the way that it worked for me is because I came into it sort of thinking that I was a footballer and a team player, and I tried to be sort of like a bit of a captain. And like
Hmm.
obviously at the age of 13,
Yeah.
I had no idea about rowing. I didn't know, what a catch was. I didn't know what a crab was.
Hmm.
But I just went in sort of thinking, right, well, I know a little bit about team sports.
Yeah.
So how can I sort of galvanize the people around me to sort of do something better?
Hmm.
Um, and I think that is essentially, where my sort of coxing skill set started. Um, and I think along the way, that's sort of been something that I've tried to like pride myself on, and I've been sort of lucky enough in the GB team. Like recently, we've had like a sports psychologist come in, and I had a sit down and a chat with him, and sort of just spoke a little bit about how I see the role. And it was crazy to me how many jobs a cox does without actually thinking about it.
Hmm.
So, you're not just sat there as like a rowing coach in the boat. You're a friend,
Hmm.
you're a leader, you're a captain, you're a sports psychologist. You are a middleman between the coach and the crew. Like, yes, you do need to know bits about rowing, but there is so much that you can do while knowing nothing about the rowing stroke that could
Hmm.
make you a totally successful cox.
Hmm.
Um, and I think if to sort of maybe look at it from a different direction, if you knew everything that there was to know about the rowing stroke, but
Hmm.
you didn't have those other bits, if you weren't empathetic, you didn't have the people skills, you couldn't, uh, you know, man manage a team and work out people's personalities, characteristics, you couldn't work with the coach,
Hmm.
you'd never be successful as a cox, even if you
Yeah.
knew everything. Um, and so that's my sort of like big out there statement that I think, if you had to pick one of like knowing everything about rowing,
Hmm.
or you could be like the linchpin of a team, you could be like the social center of a hub and get everyone firing on all cylinders,
Hmm.
that would be the cox that you'd
Hmm.
want in your team.
Oh yeah,
And,
absolutely.
and I think that's something that like obviously, we've both been at Brooks. I think that competitive nature and that
Hmm.
necessity for an independent people person,
Hmm.
that's generally where all of these sort of successful coxes have come through from Brooks. Like obviously you have more knowledge and personal sort of appreciation for Will Denegri,
Hmm.
who's now in the Oxford team, and he's doing fantastically well. I've been at Brooks a long, long time, and all of the coxes that I've sort of like been pitching against and fighting against, who have sort of like the young guns that have come through the system and been like nipping at my heels, like
Hmm.
they've all had all of those traits. Like Will is like, yes, of course he knows the rowing stroke, but
Hmm.
he's in there with all of the guys, he knows them inside out, he is
Hmm.
always helping XYZ. You go back, Scott Cockle, exactly the same. He's such a social character,
Hmm.
everyone just gravitates towards him. It's so hard not to get caught up by Scott's character and his like atmosphere that he brings.
Hmm.
You go before that, you've got Gavin McWilliams, exactly the same. He was one of those guys that maybe was a bit quieter, but he still had that bit of like dark humor about him. And again, people were drawn towards him as a sort of social linchpin. Before that, Charlie Clark, he was another guy like who was just, he was mouthy, he was gutsy, he was a real leader.
Hmm.
And he just took everything on in his stride and was just super arrogant and confident, and not in like a, I'm better than anyone else way, but just like, yeah, like I'm here to win. Come on, like I'll take anything in my stride.
Yeah.
You go through these sort of like Brooks Coxes that have come through over the last 10 years, and all of them have the same sort of traits, even though maybe their knowledge of the rowing stroke might have been varying. They were all successful because they all had those traits. And I
Hmm.
think that's something that doesn't really get said enough about coxes. And I think people come in thinking like, oh yeah, I've got to have a notepad. I've got to like write down everything that I've learned about the catch
Hmm.
today. Like that's totally important. Like obviously, you've to be able to be effective, like you've got to know bits about what you're gonna be like disclosing to your crews.
Hmm.
But you could have all of the knowledge in the world, but if you don't know how to use it, it's useless.
Yeah. And do you think that's something that can be taught? So obviously you can read about the catch and you can read about the finish. Do you think that sort of social and emotional intelligence is something that you will sort of pick up in your career as a cox, or do you think that's something you see someone that's a fresher and they'll come in and you go, that guy's got it?
Yes and no. I think you can bend those traits to
Hmm.
suit your character. Um, so again, if I'm just thinking back at some of those names, like I think, I'd sort of say someone like Scott Cockle,
Hmm.
super sociable, really like confident in any situation. You could put, a total novice of the sport with him, or you could put an Olympic champion with him, and
Hmm.
he'd be the exact same character. And he'd, just like be gift of the gab, say what he needs to say, like just talking everyone through it. And he'd just start like getting people in on his vibe, and he'd sort of lead the
Hmm.
charge. Someone like Gavin Williams, who what year was he coxing? I think he won the Temple in 2018
It's
or
70,
19.
70. Yeah.
I think Charlie
I think it
Clark's
was,
2017.
okay.
Yeah, it was 20. It might have been 2019, I think.
It was, yeah, it was either the year or the year before I came, I think.
Okay, but he was actually quite quiet,
Hmm.
and I wouldn't say he was. I wouldn't say he was shy. Like if you went up and spoke to him, like he'd be very happy to have a conversation with you. But he wasn't sort of like, here I am, look at me, like I'm ready to go kind of thing. He was just sort of like the quiet, understated. I'd say he had similarities with Will Denegri,
Hmm.
where he was almost like just quite calculated.
Hmm.
Um, and I think almost that sort of quiet, calculated, but confident sort of demeanor that he had started to bring people in to sort of trust him and have confidence in him. Um, for me, I am generally quite introvert, which probably surprises a lot of people. Like I have a very short fuse with my social battery.
Hmm.
I get back from training and I just don't want to speak to anyone for the rest of the day. And like I feel as though, when I turn up to Cox, it's like an acting performance. Like I put
Hmm.
on this um I
Like a
turn up and I'm
persona.
like, okay, I'm Harry Brightmore, the Cox today, and
Yeah.
I turn up and I'm just like chatty to everyone. I want to draw people in. I want to be like,
Hmm.
yeah, okay, right, you're doing this, you're doing that, da, 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 da. But that's like totally out of my natural character,
Hmm.
uh, and that has taken that has taken a while to get to that point, and that's taken you know quite a bit of growth and a bit of sort of steady confidence building to be able to do that.
Hmm.
Um, and I think building confidence is something that I think a lot of coxes struggle with.
Hmm.
I think I had, again, going back to having this chat with the sports psychologist. I sort of see. I think people see confidence sometimes as like being a front, which is not. I think confidence, you almost need to see it as being your like comfort zone.
Hmm.
I think if you try to sort of expand your comfort zone too quickly, it sort of snaps and the bubble bursts.
Hmm.
Whereas if you sort of very slowly bring little things into your comfort zone, you don't even notice it happening. But all of like you look back over 6 months and you think, oh wow, actually, there's tons more that I've put in here, and I feel totally fine. And
Hmm.
this is where I'm confident.
Yeah.
And so that is where experience and sort of putting yourself on the line sometimes can be really rewarding.
Hmm.
uh, and for people that aren't necessarily cocky extrovert people pleasers, you know as long as you know where you can sort of work on your personality and where you think you can get more out of your sort of coxing persona,
Mhm.
you can build that comfort zone quite wide.
And I think that's something that you can also sort of say about coaching as well, in terms of a huge part of it is just sort of getting your athletes to trust you. And then having sort of done a bit of coaching myself down at the Oxford colleges, you sort of show up and you might not necessarily, like, in your day-to-day life, you're not going to go around like telling people this is what you should be doing and you need to like work harder and do this and this and this. But it's definitely, you're sort of putting on that front and sort of trying to understand what the people around you are thinking in order to sort of get your ideas into them, I think. And that's sort of quite a big part of that role. And I don't know if you coach at Teddy's or have been coaching at Teddy's at the moment. Do you think you sort of see the parallels there as well?
Yeah, totally. I actually recently I went to speak to some of the coxers at Oxford. Had a bit of a chat with some of the like one of the coxers at Yale as well, and like I think one big message that I kind of like put forward to coxers when they're trying to think about, you know, their sort of like how they get their messages across. I asked them to think about their favorite teacher, or you know, it might be favorite music teacher or favorite sports coach when you were younger, and ask yourself, why were they your favorite? And quite often, without thinking about it, they'd be there like, oh well, you know, they made the subject really fun, or they were, you know, they just understood me and they got on with me, and you know, they helped me out a lot and fun to be around. Like all of these little sort of tiny little traits that initially probably don't actually seem like much. You know, if I was to ask you, like, what made Will Denegri good when he was coxing you?
Yeah.
You know, if you could say nothing about his rowing knowledge, what made Will good?
I think Will's a guy that always has a plan, and he sort of always knows what's coming next. And even if he doesn't know what's coming next, he tells you he does. And I think that's a very important trait to have, because it's sort of, it like you were saying, it gives you that confidence that he can say, okay, now we're going to take this crew, and like whether it's going to happen or not, he's going to say it. And it was in the final of the ladies, and he's released his Cox recording, and he's like, okay, he said something along the lines of like, we've got Leander, we're like one length off, and you can see like in the parallel video that he's got, they're miles off, or not miles off, but it's a fair bit more than a length. And you just got to be able to sort of trust this person, and whether they like will be able to get their message across is whether the people are sort of trusting him. And I think it's also smaller things, like if you're boating for a race, he says, okay, we're going to boat for a race, the queue's going to be 5 minutes long, and you'll go, okay, yeah, the queue's going to be 5 minutes late, we need to like sort of boat 5 minutes early, and all this sort of thing. Just sort of having that foresight, whether it's real or true or not, I think was really important in terms of confidence for the crew with him, and that's something that he's usually really good at.
Yeah, but I mean that's sort of exactly it. Like, you know, if you're decisive, confident, all of these traits that make a good teacher or a good sort of rowing coach, the same thing kind of applies. Like, I'm sure, you know, if you sort of reel off the top of your head, so like, you know, the top rowing establishments in the world, I'm sure, I've got no doubt of it, that there's probably somebody out there who knows more about rowing and more about the rowing stroke, and has probably done some thesis on the absolute optimum way to move a rowing boat, who knows way more than all of these head coaches at the top establishments. But maybe he's not there, or she's not there, because they can't distribute that information in the right way. And that's, you know, that's half of the challenge of a Cox.
Yeah. And I'm sort of curious to hear your sort of opinion on this, in terms of sort of getting that information across to people and understanding how to get it across to people. Do you think it's important that you know the people well and sort of you're around them regularly, or do you think, obviously at Brooks there's a lot of jumping around, and sometimes you yourself probably got sort of chucked down into the lower boats every now and then just to sort of give it a whirl, basically. Do you think it's important? And obviously you can sort of jump into those boats and they'll come off saying, wow, that was like the best session we've had in ages, despite the fact you've probably never sort of been around those guys before.
I think that's really important. This sort of comes back to my idea, the idea of like expanding your comfort zone more and more, because I think if you only cox people that you know, I think it's very easy to become sort of desensitized and a bit sort of numb to getting the most out of those people. And I think it sometimes takes, for example, if you've been coaching someone for the same on the same little point for months on end, like it's very easy just to be like, oh well, like I've been telling them this thing for months and like they know that I'm on them about it. I don't need to keep saying it because I'm actually just driving myself insane. Whereas if you brought someone else in, they might say the same point in like a slightly different way and just bang on it with maybe a bit more excitement and a bit more vigor because they're new to that particular thing, and they might get a bit more of a change out of it. So I think like having the experience of like coxing different people keeps you sort of a little bit it keeps it all a little bit fresh. So like I remember being at Brooks, like Henry Belash Webb was, I'd be put down in like the bottom 8 and I'd be sort of coaching. I've been coaching some guys in the lower boats this season to sort of keep me in a boat, and like that's been really good practice for me. At no point would I be like, oh well, I'm in the GB men's 8, like that's below me. Like actually that being at Brooks with those guys is such a good opportunity for me to keep on the boil and keep sort of like my own mind fresh. And at the same time, like I've been at Brooks where I wasn't, top cox, and I think I remember having a session where I was in a coxed 4 with, there was one sort of Brooks student rower, and then the other 3 were Alex Partridge, Rick Eggington, and Dave Gillard, who are all, like a little bit older than us, but they're legends of the sport. And, these are guys that have rowed for GB for, they've probably got a good 20 years of GB experience amongst like the 3 of them. Like Dave has been in countless boat races. He still does the veterans boat race. Alex and Rick were in the 8 at the London Olympics together, got a bronze medal. These are like awesome rowers. And so for me to be put in that situation, that was a bit where I had to be like, right, pull my boots up. This is Harry Brightmore, Cox. Like, right, Rick, Alex, I need you guys to do this. You can go and get the blades down. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I have no right in hell to be ordering these guys about. But like after the session, like Rick came up to me and was just like, oh yeah, no, you did a really good job. Like that was great fun and like really enjoyed it. And it's sort of like little things like that where it's just like, yeah, that was like, I did a good job there. And I've just put that ever so slightly into my comfort zone. And so next time I come up and I'm faced with, some Olympians that are way above my experience level, I know that it's not quite as scary as the first time I did it. So yeah, like I think, as a cox, if you can keep your mind fresh and cox as many different varieties of sort of people and abilities, and like it makes you far more experienced. I cox women's crews, men's crews. I've been in, so I had some sessions in the Teddies 8 last season where I did a bit of coxing with them. I'll go home to Chester, my hometown, and I've coxed some of the senior men there. I've coxed the veterans crews there. It's like, all of those experiences count. They're not just useless because you're not with the people that you want to win Henley with. Like it doesn't work like that.
Yeah. And I was chatting with Ronnie Cantrell. That was a couple of days ago. That's not published yet, but will be hopefully by tomorrow.
Yeah.
And he was saying when he's coaching, his coach when he was sort of learning the ropes, and that his coach would sometimes sit on the launch with him and follow him around and go, actually, what you've just said there is like, I really like the way you articulated that and sort of got that point across. And despite the fact that the guy that was sort of teaching Ronnie the ropes was sort of saying that, and he's like this hugely successful coach in Michigan, and he's sort of run the longest running coach at Michigan Uni. I think he said like sort of beyond all the basketball and football coaches that sort of hang around for years and years. And he'd been super successful. And he was sort of saying to Ronnie, who's in his first year there, like, I enjoyed what you're saying there. And obviously Ronnie's sort of taken that on and said he just really enjoys sort of sitting on launches with any team he goes to. And whenever he's sort of traveling, he'll sort of do what he can to hop on a launch and see what the other coaches are saying, just to sort of get that outside experience and learning new drills. And sort of if the coach will say something and picking up drills, like a huge part of sort of rowing from my experience is you learn so much from different places. So you'll sort of, one coach will say, this is a drill that I've done, and then suddenly you do that drill with people that you're coaching or people that you're in a boat with, and then that information gets spread and spread. And I know sometimes a lot of the guys at Brooks coach down at like Oxford colleges, and we do a drill that Henry has sort of either come up with or found out on the internet.
And you see all of the Oxford colleges,
and then suddenly all of the Oxford colleges are doing it the next morning.
Yeah.
And it's that sort of thing that I think is sort of really quite important, because it gives you the ability to sort of pick up new things and new skills, and then sort of implement them into what you're doing as well.
Yeah. No, totally. I completely agree with that. I think it's I think it is, unless you're being led by someone who is sort of keeping things exciting, like doing the same drills over and over again and doing the same session over and over again, like training can get stale quite quickly. So, to quote, what was it? To quote Cam Buchan, I'm trying to think what he said, like variety is variety is key. And I definitely agree with that. I think sometimes a new funny drill, no matter how sort of silly it might be, might make you just think about things in a slightly different way. Or to be honest, I think it might even align a focus just a little bit more intently, maybe. If you're doing like a drill of like just pausing at hands away, and you've done that for weeks and weeks and weeks, and you eventually get to a point where it's like, well, the boat's sort of balanced, and it doesn't really matter if I do it like exactly in time with everyone else. I can just go to hands away, and it's kind of fine, and I'm not going to get called out for it.
Or so even you just sort of get good at the drill without actually sort of translating that into your rowing.
If the balance is perfect, and you just think, oh well, actually I haven't even like extended my arms fully, I was a bit later than everyone else, so like what's the point? But then it's like, right, okay, we're going to stop doing pausing at hands away, we're going to do cutting the cake and go hands away back to the finish, and then back out and take another stroke. It's like, oh, I've actually got to be in time at hands away, and it just makes you be right, okay, well actually I need to get my hands out straight away. Just like, a little bit of variety can just make the focus a little bit more intent.